I've discussed this subject before to some extent, but I thought I'd revisit it in a bit more detail and emphasise the important points about the attitude of building wealth. I've always generally had the habit of spending money on things that I need or things that make life better. I believe I was trained to do this from a young age. Growing up, I was never really allowed expensive toys and things like that, but I was taught how to invest my money. I didn't know that much about it in my early years, just that my parents invested money into funds and things like that. And even from the age of 8, after saving up money, instead of spending it on a toy, which I wanted to do, my dad told me to invest it and that it would grow and would be worth more in the future. I remember feeling quite complacent about this at the time. So I think it's a matter of education in combination with your nature. I think many children would probably protest or rebel at the thought of investing their money and not being able to use it at a young age, but I saw the positive side of it. I was never really a fan of waste or being wasteful or being frivolous with resource. I was always quite resourceful. As mentioned before, I passed my driving test when I was 17. That's the kind of thing my parents invested in, because as soon as I turned 17 they invested in driving lessons for me, luckily, as they knew this would open up options in future. So whereas I wasn't allowed expensive toys and things, money was spent on me in terms of education or things that made my life easier in the future. But then for 13 years I never actually owned a car. I got used to taking the train everywhere. I was at university in Manchester and I took the train there for years. After that I worked in Birmingham but carried on living with my parents in Coventry. In hindsight, it probably would have been better to have lived in Birmingham at that stage of my life because the commuting time was probably not worth it. But while earning from my first job, most of that money was saved or invested. I then went back to studying after this, and for my second master's degree I received a scholarship, which means the tuition fee was paid for me, and I used the money I earned in that job for my accommodation at my next university. It might not be ideal, but many of the clothes I used I carry on using for years. I never really felt the need to buy expensive clothes or things like that. I probably should have bought clothes a bit more readily or a bit more often, but my mindset was not so extreme that I just wore really bad clothes all the time. It's just I was careful with spending habits. I've had a selection of clothes to use for years. Even now I have a wardrobe full of shirts. I don't know where half of them came from. A lot of them were gifts. The chair I'm sitting on I found for 1/3 of the actual price. Someone was selling it on Marketplace. They live nearby and it more than serves its purpose. Many of the things around the room you can see I've had for years. They're not very expensive, or they were things that other people didn't need. So these habits continued with me throughout my 20s. I even lived in central London when I was doing my PhD, and I always wanted to live close to wherever I worked or studied, so my accommodations were within 10 or 15 minutes walk of the university. Because they were student accommodations, they were quite cheap. They were extremely cheap for central London. My priority there was to study and not to waste money on things I didn't need. Then when earning in my 30s, my salary went up. I still spent much of my time living at home because my next job was in Coventry. I could have moved out if I wanted to. There was no real need or desire behind that. The option was there, but I found it much more efficient to live with my parents and commute as and when required. Subsequent jobs were in Coventry as well. My next one was a 20-minute walk from my home, and this is when my contracting rate started to increase. But I naturally never let lifestyle creep affect me. You've probably heard about this phenomenon on the internet. There are apparently bankers who say they cannot understand how people can live on less than £1 million a year, and I think that's a prime example of lifestyle creep. So the more I've always earned, my lifestyle has pretty much been lived on a similar level. But then people might ask, what is the point of earning more and more money? It's because this money you earn, it goes to work. And by investing in property, you're providing high quality housing, especially if you do it properly, which is the way I do it. You invest in property professionally and get it managed professionally, so you're offering a service, and if you provide a service to society, then the money follows that. I think also what contributed to this mindset was having quite a strict upbringing. There was a lot of delayed gratification in the way I was brought up, so I think this has enabled me to sacrifice probably more than what most people were able to, and to use that mindset to build resource rather than to spend whatever I earn. So by my mid-30s, my contracting rates were becoming higher and higher. Then I moved to London to work in data science, and the contracting rates, as mentioned, were good and getting better, but I was still wearing the same clothes I always wore. I probably had a few additions here and there as and when required, but in my mind I was building resource and opening opportunities for the future. That sort of thing interests me far more than buying some new shoes, because whenever you engage in materialism, there will always be the next thing and then the next thing you want to buy. You'll never be satisfied if you keep focusing on material goods. I remember thinking at the time when I worked in London that the economy was good. My rental properties were renting well for high rents. Things were working on the contracting side. But I knew to myself, these things may not last forever. During the mid-noughties, I used to visit my friend after work. He was a futures trader in London, and his colleagues were 20 years older. I thought to myself, were these not the guys who raked in money during the 80s? He told me they were, but the reason they were still at work was because they thought that would last forever. So as soon as money came in for them, it went straight back out. There's no real issue with that if that's how you want to live, but if you want to build wealth, it's better to control spending habits. Wealth is generated more from your spending habits rather than your earning habits. You don't have to be on huge salaries to be able to build wealth and live well in the future. So I was working in London up until 2019. I had a number of properties at that stage and I was earning well. And then in 2019, my data science contracting just shut down for 2 years. There was no contracts out there. I think it was due to IR35 issues at the time. Even people in banking who had been there much longer than me said they had never seen anything like this. But then luckily it showed that because I'd invested my money, by that stage I didn't really need to work. And then COVID shut the world down for 2 years, so I got very much into my artwork and trying to work out what to do more with property or going to events. I still had a mentorship to find out what more I could do. So I think what interests me is the opportunities that open up with money. Rather than spending money on material goods, it opens up your options in life. If you're into materialistic things, then this in itself is not an issue, but as long as you monitor how much you spend and what you spend it on. So as my data science contracting stopped for 2 years in around 2019, I was looking for more contracts at the time, mostly because if you just live off property, it can be a bit isolating, and I always prefer new challenges and technical work, which is why I was still open to contracts and I was still trying to find them. But the recruitment industry seemed to shut down and there was no new contracts, so I was living in London for about 4 months after my last contract in 2019, but then I thought to myself I was wasting money on rent there. So I didn't buy in London, I was just renting, so I cancelled my rental contract and moved back to Coventry. A lot of people would have issue living with their parents. My parents were at the time getting quite old, so I was coming back on the weekends to see if they needed help with anything anyway. So I moved back in with them, and that's not a huge issue for me. But again, this really amplifies the amount of money you can save and then invest for future purposes. So I continued with these practices, and then from 2021 to 2023, the contract market started again. This time the contracts became remote, which saved on commuting costs and paying for rent somewhere in a different city or having to buy in a different city. The contracts were inside IR35, which is less than ideal, but swings and roundabouts. So again, with the money I earned, the vast majority of it I invested. Since 2017 I have leased cars, so I've leased 3 cars that are quite nice. You can use some of your money for fun, but then again, the cars I've leased do make your life easier as well. The car I have at the moment is quite luxurious, but it's also like going in a plane. It's very easy and stress-free to drive anywhere. If you drive for 2 hours, it feels like you've driven for 20 minutes. And this is another important point. So you should spend money on things that improve your life or remove stress from your life. So it's a win-win, because the cars are actually quite appealing, but they do make your life easier as well. The ones I've leased anyway. So the point of this episode is to reiterate that if you do have frivolous spending habits, try to control them. I don't really like labels, but maybe the way I live is more in line with what you might call minimalism. I don't know if I technically am a minimalist, but I think I've always had a natural understanding that you shouldn't waste money and you should spend it on things that open up opportunities. This way I've been able to really amplify my assets and investments in quite a small time frame, and hopefully you can do the same if you follow the same principles. Thanks for listening. Let me know if I can be of assistance in any way. See you in the next episode.